I trusted her with my life, and she used that trust to steal it from me, one drop at a time. My name is Eleanor May Thompson, and I'm 73 years old now. What I'm about to tell you happened 15 years ago, but I remember every single detail as if it were yesterday. Some memories fade with time, but trauma burns itself into your soul. I need to share this story because somewhere out there, someone might be living through what I survived, and they need to know they're not crazy. They need to know the signs. Before I begin, I want to ask you something. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me reach others who might need to hear this. It started in the autumn of 2009. I was 58 years old, healthy as a horse, or so I thought. My husband Marcus and I had been married for 35 years, and life was good. We had two beautiful children, both grown with families of their own. Marcus's mother, Celestine Whitmore, had moved in with us 6 months earlier. She was 81 at the time, and after breaking her hip, she couldn't live alone anymore. Marcus was an only child, so naturally we opened our home to her. I want you to understand something. I wasn't a saint, but I tried my best. I cooked her favorite meals, helped her bathe, took her to doctor's appointments, and sat with her during her favorite television shows. I genuinely cared for this woman. The first symptom appeared on a Tuesday morning in October. I woke up feeling dizzy, disoriented. The room spun around me like I was on some horrible carnival ride. Marcus had already left for work. He managed a hardware store downtown and always left before dawn. I dragged myself to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left inside me. When I finally caught my breath, I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under my eyes that hadn't been there the night before. I chalked it up to a stomach bug, maybe something I ate. Celestine found me there, leaning against the sink, trembling. "Oh, sweet Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "You look absolutely terrible. Come, let me make you some of my special tea." It always helped Marcus when he was sick as a boy. I was too weak to argue. She helped me back to bed, propped pillows behind my head, and within minutes, returned with a steaming cup of dark, herbal-smelling tea. "Drink it all, dear. Every last drop. It'll make you feel so much better." The tea tasted bitter, almost metallic, but I forced it down, trusting that this woman who had raised my husband only wanted to help me. That's how it began, with trust and a cup of tea. The days that followed were a nightmare of confusion and pain. Some mornings I'd wake up feeling almost normal, energetic even, ready to tackle the day. Other mornings, I couldn't lift my head from the pillow. The dizziness would come in waves, accompanied by nausea so severe I couldn't keep anything down. My hands started trembling uncontrollably. I'd reach for a glass of water and watch my fingers shake like I had some neurological disorder. Marcus noticed, of course. He begged me to see a doctor, but Celestine was always there with her calming voice and her knowing smile. "Doctors will just pump her full of chemicals," she'd tell Marcus. "I've seen this before. It's stress, probably menopause catching up with her. Give her time and rest. I'll take care of Eleanor. You focus on work." And Marcus, devoted son that he was, believed his mother. I did too initially. I thought maybe she was right. Maybe it was just my aging body betraying me. But then the symptoms intensified. I started losing my hair, not gradually, but in clumps that would come out when I brushed it. My skin developed strange rashes that appeared overnight and vanished just as quickly. I lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks. My wedding ring, which had fit snugly for decades, spun loosely around my finger. The worst part wasn't the physical symptoms. It was the mental fog. I'd be in the middle of a conversation and forget what I was saying. I'd walk into rooms and have no idea why I was there. Once, I left the stove on for 3 hours because I completely forgot I'd been cooking. Marcus came home to a smoke-filled kitchen and a pot that had burned black. He found me sitting in the living room, staring at nothing, completely unaware. That's when fear truly set in. Was this dementia? Was I losing my mind at 58? Celestine became my constant companion during this time. She insisted on bringing me all my meals in bed, preparing special teas and soups that she said would restore my strength. "You need someone who truly cares about you," she'd whisper, stroking my hair. "I'm here, Eleanor. I'll always be here. Every evening, she'd prepare my bedtime tea, the same bitter, metallic-tasting brew. "Drink it all," she'd remind me, watching with those sharp gray eyes until the cup was empty. And I did. I trusted her completely. But trust, I learned, can be a weapon in the hands of someone who knows how to wield it. 3 months into my mystery illness, something happened that would become my first real clue. I was having a rare good day and decided to do some cleaning. In Celestine's room, while changing her sheets, I knocked over her bedside table. A small locked box fell to the floor, and the impact popped it open. Inside were bottles, dozens of small bottles with medical labels. My hands shook as I picked one up and read the label. Rat poison. Another bottle, antifreeze. A third, some medication I'd never heard of. My heart stopped. Why would my mother-in-law have these things locked in a box by her bed? The discovery of those bottles should have been my wake-up call. But what I found next made me realize the horror was far worse than I ever imagined. I stood in Celestine's room, holding that bottle of rat poison in my trembling hands, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps she kept these things for what? Pest control. But antifreeze, strange medications, and why locked in a box by her bedside? My mind raced through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. I heard her walker squeaking down the hallway. She was coming back from the bathroom. In a panic, I shoved everything back into the box, closed it as best I could, and set it on the nightstand. I grabbed the dirty sheets and rushed out of her room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Marcus, listening to his gentle snoring, and my mind kept returning to those bottles. The rational part of my brain insisted there must be an innocent explanation. This was Celestine, the woman who had raised my husband, who baked cookies for our children when they were small, who cried tears of joy at our wedding. But another part of me, a quieter, more intuitive part, whispered something terrible. What if she's poisoning you? I pushed the thought away immediately. It was absurd, paranoid, the kind of thing you'd see in a television movie. Real people didn't poison their daughters-in-law. Real mothers didn't harm the women their sons loved, did they? The next morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I refused Celestine's morning tea. "I'm feeling much better today," I lied, forcing brightness into my voice. "I think I'll just have some coffee instead." Something flickered across her face so quick I almost missed it. Disappointment, anger, but then her warm smile returned. "Of course, dear. Whatever makes you feel best. But I do think the tea has been helping. You've been improving so much." Had I been improving? I didn't think so. If anything, I'd been getting progressively worse. That day, without Celestine's tea, something remarkable happened. By evening, my head felt clearer than it had in months. The constant nausea that had become my companion subsided to a dull queasiness. My hands still trembled, but less violently. I could think more clearly, focus on conversations. Marcus noticed immediately. "Eleanor, you look better. There's color in your cheeks again." He was so happy, so relieved. I wanted to share his joy, but I couldn't shake the dark suspicion growing in my mind. Before bed, Celestine appeared with her usual offering, the bedtime tea. "You must drink this, Eleanor. You skipped your morning tea, but you absolutely need this one for a good night's rest." She stood over me, waiting. I looked at that cup, at the dark liquid swirling inside, and every instinct in my body screamed danger. But I couldn't refuse without explaining why, and I wasn't ready to make accusations without proof. What if I was wrong? What if my sick mind was creating monsters where none existed? So I did something I'd later realize saved my life. I pretended to drink it. I lifted the cup to my lips, tilted it, and let the tea touch my mouth while not actually swallowing. I made exaggerated gulping sounds, then showed her the empty cup. "All gone," I said, smiling. She seemed satisfied and left the room with her walker squeaking away. The moment she was gone, I spit the small amount of tea I'd held in my mouth into a tissue. The taste was so bitter, so chemical, it made my eyes water. I wrapped the tissue carefully and hid it in my nightstand drawer. Then I did something that required me to overcome every instinct of politeness I'd been raised with. I poured the remaining tea from my cup into a small glass jar I'd been using for spare change. I sealed it tight and hid it in the back of my closet, The next morning, I felt even better. Not perfect, whatever damage had been done to my body needed time to heal, but noticeably improved. My mind was sharper, the fog lifting. That's when I made a decision. I needed proof. I needed to document what was happening. I told Marcus I was taking a day trip to visit my sister in the next town. Instead, I drove to a laboratory I'd found in the phone book. The technician, a young woman named Jasmine Chen, listened to my story with growing concern. Double quotes, Mrs. Thompson. She said carefully, "Are you saying you think someone is poisoning you?" Hearing it out loud, spoken by a stranger, made it sound insane. "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe I'm crazy. But I need to know what's in this tea." I handed her the jar. She held it up to the light, swirling the liquid. "We can test this, but it'll take about a week and cost around $300. I didn't care about the money. I needed answers. Do it. Test for everything: poisons, medications, anything that shouldn't be in herbal tea. That week was the longest of my life. I continued refusing Celestine's teas, making excuses about wanting to try different remedies, about giving my stomach a rest. She became increasingly agitated. "You're making a mistake, Eleanor. You need your medicine. She'd called it medicine, not tea. The word choice chilled me. I also started noticing other things. How she'd hover whenever I ate, asking if I enjoyed the food, if I tasted anything unusual. How she'd become irritated when Marcus or our children were around, as if their presence interfered with her plans. How she'd started commenting on my health with a strange mix of concern and satisfaction. "You're looking peaky again, dear. Perhaps you should rest more." Meanwhile, my health continued to improve. Each day without Celestine's care, I felt stronger. My hair stopped falling out. The tremors in my hands diminished. The mental fog cleared. I started to feel like myself again, like Eleanor. Not this sick, confused shell of a person I'd become. Marcus was overjoyed but puzzled. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he'd say, kissing my forehead. If only he knew. The call from the laboratory came on a Thursday afternoon. Jasmine's voice was serious, professional. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to come in immediately. And I strongly suggest you bring the police." My blood ran cold. "What did you find?" There was a pause, and then she said words that confirmed my worst nightmare and shattered my world. "The tea contains multiple toxic substances: arsenic, thallium, and crushed oleander leaves. Mrs. Thompson, someone has been systematically poisoning you. These amounts, given regularly over time, would cause exactly the symptoms you described. Eventually, they would cause organ failure and death." I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me just like it had during those terrible sick mornings. But this time, it wasn't poison causing it. It was the horrifying realization that Marcus's mother, the woman sleeping down the hall, the woman I'd cared for and trusted, had been trying to kill me slowly, deliberately for months. Armed with proof of Celestine's deadly intentions, I knew I had to act fast, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened when I finally confronted her. I sat in that laboratory, gripping the test results with shaking hands, staring at words that seemed impossible: arsenic, thallium, oleander, poison, murder in slow motion. Jasmine offered me water, a chair, her phone to call the police. But I couldn't move. My mind was racing backward through the past 6 months, reinterpreting every moment through this new, horrifying lens. Every cup of tea, every concerned smile, every "I'm here for you, dear," all of it had been a lie. All of it had been part of a plan to kill me. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to call the authorities," Jasmine urged gently. She was right, of course. This was attempted murder. But my mind went immediately to Marcus. How could I tell my husband that his mother, the woman who gave him life, who raised him, who he loved unconditionally, was trying to kill his wife? How would he survive that knowledge? Our children, our grandchildren, this would destroy our entire family. And what if I was wrong about Celestine's intentions? What if there was some explanation I couldn't see? No, I knew that was denial talking. You don't accidentally keep rat poison and antifreeze locked in a box by your bed. You don't accidentally put oleander in someone's tea. This was intentional. I drove home in a daze, the test results sealed in an envelope on the passenger seat. I'd promised Jasmine I'd go to the police the next day, but first, I needed to understand why. Why would an 81-year-old woman want to murder her daughter-in-law? What had I done to deserve this? I thought we'd had a good relationship. Yes, there were small tensions. She sometimes undermined my parenting decisions when the kids were young. Occasionally made comments about my housekeeping or cooking, but nothing that would justify murder. Nothing that would explain this level of hatred. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for 20 minutes, trying to compose myself. I had to act normal. I couldn't let Celestine know I was onto her, not until I had a plan. Finally, I walked into the house. Marcus was in the kitchen, making dinner. There you are. How's your sister? I'd forgotten my lie about visiting my sister. She's fine. Good visit. Celestine sat in her chair in the living room, watching her evening programs. When I passed by, she looked up at me with those gray eyes. And for the first time, I saw what had been there all along: cold, calculating malice hidden beneath a grandmother's face. That night, she brought me the bedtime tea as usual. Here you are, dear, drink up. You must maintain the routine. She emphasized that last word strangely, routine. She'd been poisoning me on a routine, ensuring regular doses. I took the cup with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Thank you, Celestine. You're so thoughtful. I lifted the cup to my lips, pretended to sip, and as soon as she left, I poured it into the jar I now kept hidden in my closet. Evidence. I was collecting evidence, but I needed more than evidence of what she was doing. I needed to understand why. That night, after everyone was asleep, I crept back into Celestine's room. My hands were trembling, not from poison this time, but from fear and adrenaline. I found the locked box again, and this time I noticed a small key on a chain she kept hidden under her pillow. My heart pounding, I took the key and opened the box. Inside were the poison bottles, but also something else I'd missed before: a journal. Small, leather-bound, with pages covered in her spidery handwriting. I took the journal to the bathroom, locked the door, and began to read. What I found made my blood run cold. Entries dating back years, before she'd moved in with us. Marcus should have married Genevieve. One entry read, she was from a good family with breeding and grace. Instead, he chose that common woman, Eleanor, with her plain face and simple ways. She's trapped him, held him back from his potential. I raised him to be someone important, and she's made him ordinary. The entries became more disturbing as I read. She'd apparently been planning this for years, waiting for the right opportunity. When she broke her hip and moved in with us, she saw her chance. Living under their roof, I can finally correct the mistake Marcus made 35 years ago. Eleanor's health is starting to fail. So sad. But these things happen to women of a certain age. When she's gone, Marcus will need me. He'll see that I was right all along. Perhaps he'll even find Genevieve again. She never married. She waited for him. I had to cover my mouth to keep from screaming. This woman had been poisoning me, not out of sudden rage or a single moment of madness, but as part of a calculated, long-planned scheme to remove me from my own husband's life. She actually believed she was doing the right thing, correcting some cosmic error. The journal detailed everything: how she'd researched poisons that would mimic natural illness, how she'd carefully calibrated the doses to make me sick slowly so no one would suspect murder, how she planned to be the comforting presence at my funeral, the devoted mother supporting her grieving son. One entry, dated just 2 weeks earlier, made me physically ill. Eleanor is weakening beautifully. Another month, maybe 2, and her organs will begin to fail. The doctors will call it some autoimmune disease or cancer. They never look for poison in cases like this. Marcus will be sad, of course, but he'll recover. He'll finally see that I only want what's best for him. And perhaps in time, he'll forgive me for never warming to his unfortunate choice of wife. I sat on that bathroom floor, reading by the dim night light, tears streaming down my face, not just because this woman had been trying to kill me, but because of the years of subtle hostility I'd dismissed, the comments I'd excused, the coldness I'd tried to win over with kindness. She'd never seen me as a person, never valued me as her son's chosen partner. To her, I was just an obstacle to be removed, and she'd been willing to murder me to do it. I photographed every page of that journal with my phone technology I'd recently learned to use from our grandchildren. Then I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and crept back to my bedroom. Marcus was still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that his mother was a would-be murderer. I lay beside him, watching his chest rise and fall, and knew that tomorrow I would have to break his heart. There was no way around it. The woman he loved, the woman he trusted, had been poisoning his wife, and I had proof. The next morning, I called Detective Raymond Park at the local police station. I'd met him years ago at a community event and remembered him as competent and kind. "Detective Park, my name is Eleanor Thompson. I need to report an attempted murder." There was a pause. "Mrs. Thompson, can you tell me more?" I took a deep breath. "My mother-in-law has been poisoning me for the past 6 months. I have laboratory tests proving the tea she's been giving me contains arsenic, thallium, and oleander, and I have her journal detailing her plans to kill me." He arrived within the hour, along with another detective, Lucia Martinez. I showed them everything: the test results, the photographs of the journal entries, the samples of tea I'd saved. Their faces grew grimmer as they reviewed the evidence. "Mrs. Thompson, this is very serious. We need to take Celestine Whitmore into custody immediately." I nodded, but then asked the question that had been haunting me. "Can I tell my husband first? Can I be the one to explain this to him before you arrest her? He deserves to hear it from me, not from strangers taking his mother away in handcuffs." They hesitated but agreed to give me 1 hour. I found Marcus in the garage, organizing his Tulsa weekend ritual he'd followed for years. "Marcus, honey, can you come inside? We need to talk about something important." He must have heard something in my voice because his face immediately filled with concern. We sat at the kitchen table, and I held his hands in mine. The moment I told Marcus that his mother had been poisoning me, his face transformed in a way I'd never seen before, and what happened next tore our family apart in ways I never imagined. Marcus's face went through several transformations as I spoke. First, confusion, his eyebrows drawing together as if he couldn't quite process my words. Then disbelief, his head shaking slowly, a sad smile forming as if waiting for me to admit this was some terrible joke. But as I laid out the evidence, the lab results, the photos of the journal, the bottles I'd found, his expression shifted to something I'd never seen in our 35 years of marriage. Horror, not just shock or surprise, but deep, existential horror. The kind that comes when your entire understanding of reality shatters. "No," he whispered. "No, Eleanor, there has to be a mistake. My mother wouldn't. She couldn't." His voice broke. I squeezed his hands tighter, tears streaming down my face. "I know, sweetheart. I know how impossible this seems. But it's true. I have proof. The detectives are outside waiting. They're going to arrest her." He pulled his hands from mine, standing abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a scream. "The detectives. You called the police before telling me. Before we could figure this out as a family?" I stood too, reaching for him, but he stepped back. "Marcus, she tried to kill me. She's been poisoning me for 6 months. What was I supposed to do?" He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "I don't know. Talk to me first. Let me confront her. She's 81 years old, Eleanor. She's my mother. Maybe she's confused. Maybe she didn't understand what she was doing. She understood perfectly." I interrupted, my voice harder than I intended. "I read her journal, Marcus. Every word. She planned this. She wanted me dead so you could be free of me, so you could find someone she considered more worthy." He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "That's insane. My mother loves you. She's always loved you." I wanted to scream. How could he be so blind? But then I remembered he'd grown up with her, been shaped by her, loved by her. To him, she was the woman who'd tucked him into bed, who'd made his favorite meals, who'd sacrificed for him after his father died. She was his protector, his foundation, and I was asking him to see her as a murderer before he could say anything else. We heard the front door open. Celestine's walker squeaked into the hallway. She'd been out in the garden. "Marcus, Eleanor." I heard voices. "Is everything all right?" Her voice was sweet, concerned. Marcus looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Please don't do this," that look said. "Please tell me this isn't real." But then Detective Park knocked on the kitchen door, and reality came crashing in. Everything happened so fast after that. The detectives entered, showed their badges, explained to Celestine that she was under arrest for attempted murder. I'll never forget her face in that moment. There was no surprise, no confusion, no elderly woman bewilderment. Instead, there was rage. Pure, undiluted rage directed entirely at me. "You ungrateful witch," she hissed, her voice transforming into something I'd never heard from her before. "After everything I've done for you, after I opened my home to you when you married my son, this is how you repay me." Marcus moved between us instinctively, protecting. Who his mother? His wife? I don't think even he knew. "Mom, is it true? Did you put something in Eleanor's tea?" She laughed, actually laughed, a brittle, terrible sound. "I was trying to help her. Those were herbal remedies, ancient medicines that doctors are too ignorant to understand. I was making her better." Detective Martinez stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, we have laboratory results showing arsenic, thallium, and oleander in the tea you gave Mrs. Thompson. These are poisons, not medicines." "Lies!" Celestine shrieked, her composed grandmother facade completely shattered. "She's lying. She's always been jealous of my relationship with Marcus. She's trying to turn my son against me." The detectives began reading her rights, but she kept screaming, struggling despite her walker. "Marcus, tell them your wife is a liar. You know me. You know I would never." But Marcus had sunk into a chair, his head in his hands. He was crying deep, wrenching sobs that broke my heart. They took her away in handcuffs, still screaming accusations at me. The neighbors had come out to watch Mrs. Kowalski from next door, the young couple with the new baby across the street. Our private nightmare was becoming public spectacle. After they'd driven away with Celestine in the back of the police car, Detective Park stayed behind to get my full statement. Marcus wouldn't even look at me. He sat at that kitchen table, staring at nothing, tears silently running down his face. That night was the worst of our marriage. Marcus moved into the guest room without a word. I tried to talk to him, to explain, to comfort him, but he was like a ghost present but not really there. Our children called. They'd heard from neighbors, from friends. The news was already spreading through our small town like wildfire. Our daughter, Victoria, was supportive. "Mom, I'm coming home. You shouldn't be alone." But our son, Graham, was angry. "How could you do this to Grandma? She's an old woman. Couldn't you have handled this privately?" The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. Celestine was denied bail. The judge ruled she was a flight risk and a danger to me. Marcus went to visit her every day at the county jail. He'd leave without telling me, return hours later with red eyes and wouldn't speak. He was grieving, I understood that, but I needed him too. I was still recovering from being poisoned, still dealing with the trauma of knowing someone had tried to kill me, and that someone was his mother. Our small town divided into camps. Some people believed me. They'd seen how sick I'd been, how dramatically I'd recovered once Celestine was arrested. But others whispered that I was a cruel daughter-in-law who'd fabricated evidence to get rid of an inconvenient elderly relative. I started receiving hate mail, anonymous notes left in our mailbox calling me evil, wicked, a homewrecker. One note said, "You'll rot in hell for what you've done to that sweet old lady." The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. The district attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Vance, assured me they had a strong case. The journal alone is damning. Mrs. Thompson, combined with the laboratory evidence and your medical records showing improvement after you stopped consuming the tea. No jury will acquit her, but I didn't care about the jury anymore. I cared about Marcus. 6 weeks after Celestine's arrest, I found him in our bedroom, packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" I asked, though part of me already knew. He didn't look at me. "I need space, Eleanor. I need time to think." My heart cracked. "Marcus, please. I know this is hard, but we need to get through this together. I'm your wife. She tried to kill me." Finally, he looked at me, and his eyes were so full of pain I could barely stand it. "She's my mother. I don't know how to reconcile that with what she did. Every time I look at you, I see what she tried to do, and every time I think of her in that jail cell, I see the woman who raised me alone after Dad died. I see the woman who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. I'm being torn in half, Eleanor, and I can't. I just can't be here right now." He left that night, moved into a motel across town. Our children tried to mediate, to bring us back together, but Marcus was drowning in his grief and couldn't reach for me. I was alone in our house, recovering from poisoning, preparing to testify against my mother-in-law, watching my marriage crumble. If you're watching this and you've experienced something similar, please subscribe to this channel. You're not alone. Your truth matters, even when others can't accept it. As the trial approached, I discovered something in Celestine's past that explained everything, but this revelation came with a price I never expected to pay. 2 weeks before the trial, I received a phone call from a woman named Dorothy Brennan. Her voice was elderly, uncertain. "Mrs. Thompson, you don't know me, but I read about your case in the newspaper. I think I need to tell you about Genevieve Ashford," that name. The woman Celestine had mentioned in her journal. The woman she'd wanted Marcus to marry. "Who are you?" I asked. Dorothy took a shaky breath. "I was Genevieve's best friend. She died 12 years ago. And I think you need to know what Celestine did to her. We met at a quiet cafe downtown." Dorothy was in her 80s, fragile looking but with sharp, intelligent eyes. She slid an old photograph across the table. A beautiful young woman with dark hair and a radiant smile stood next to a young man I recognized, Marcus, probably 25 years old, looking handsome and happy. "Genevieve and Marcus dated for 2 years, Dorothy began. "This was before you, of course. They were deeply in love, planning to marry. Celestine approved of Genevieve. She came from wealth, had connections, all the things Celestine valued. But then Genevieve got sick. My stomach dropped." "What kind of sick?" Dorothy's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "The same kind of sick you were, Mrs. Thompson." She started having dizzy spells, nausea, tremors. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. This went on for about 6 months. Celestine was very involved in her care, always bringing her specialties and remedies. But Genevieve had someone else who cared about her, a protective older brother, Thomas. He grew suspicious when Genevieve kept getting sicker despite Celestine's help. "What happened?" I whispered, though I already knew. Thomas confronted Celestine privately. I don't know exactly what was said, but the next day, Genevieve's illness mysteriously improved. "And 3 days later, Marcus met you at that community dance." I sat back, stunned. "She was poisoning Genevieve too. She was trying to kill her." Dorothy nodded. "I can't prove it, and Thomas has since passed away. But Genevieve told me, right before she died of cancer years later, that Thomas had suspected Celestine of poisoning her. He threatened to go to the police unless Celestine stayed away from his sister. Celestine agreed, but only after making Marcus break up with Genevieve. She told him some lie about Genevieve cheating on him, I think. He believed his mother and ended the relationship. Genevieve was heartbroken, but at least she was alive. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. So when Marcus married me instead, someone she considered even less acceptable than Genevieve, she bided her time, waiting for an opportunity. Dorothy reached across the table, gripping my hand. "You survived because you're smart and strong. Genevieve was young and trusting. She would have died if Thomas hadn't intervened. You need to tell the story at the trial. The jury needs to know this wasn't a confused old woman making a mistake. This was a pattern of behavior." I contacted the district attorney immediately with this information. She managed to track down some of Genevieve's medical records and testimony from one of her former doctors who remembered the strange case of the young woman who mysteriously recovered once she cut ties with her boyfriend's family. It wasn't enough to charge Celestine for what she'd done to Genevieve. Too much time had passed, and too much evidence was lost. But it was enough to establish a pattern. The trial began on a gray Monday morning in November. The courtroom was packed. Our family drama had become regional news. Marcus sat on Celestine's side of the courtroom. Not with me, not holding my hand, but with his mother. That hurt more than the poisoning. Victoria and Graham sat behind me, their support a small comfort. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. The laboratory reports, the journal entries, my medical records showing the dramatic decline and subsequent recovery. Photos of me at my sickest, skeletal, hollow-eyed, barely recognizable. Several people in the courtroom gasped. Then I took the stand. The prosecutor, Ms. Vance, walked me through everything: how I'd welcomed Celestine into our home, how the illness began, how she'd been so attentive with her teas and remedies. I described reading the journal, discovering the poisons, realizing that someone I trusted was trying to kill me. When I mentioned the entry about correcting Marcus's mistake by marrying me, I heard Marcus make a sound, a broken, wounded sound. For the first time since the arrest, he seemed to really understand the depth of his mother's hatred toward me. The defense attorney, a slick man named Harold Berkshire, tried to paint me as a vindictive daughter-in-law who'd fabricated evidence. Isn't it true, Mrs. Thompson, that you resented taking care of your elderly mother-in-law? That you saw her as a burden? I looked him straight in the eye. I saw her as family. I cared for her willingly. I loved her because she was Marcus's mother. That's what made this betrayal so devastating. Then came Dorothy Brennan's testimony about Genevieve. The defense objected strenuously, but the judge allowed it as evidence of a pattern of behavior. As Dorothy described what had happened to Genevieve, I watched Celestine's face. For the first time, I saw fear there. She knew the jury was connecting the dots. Finally, Celestine herself took the stand. It was a disaster for the defense. She couldn't maintain the sweet grandmother act. Under cross-examination, her bitterness toward me poured out. Marcus deserved better, she said, her voice venomous. He was meant for greatness, and Eleanor made him ordinary. She trapped him with her plain face and simple ways. Her attorney tried to rein her in, but she was beyond control. Those teas were supposed to free him. He would have been better off without her. The courtroom erupted. The judge had to bang his gavel multiple times to restore order. Celestine's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. She'd essentially confessed in front of the jury. Ms. Vance didn't even need to say much in closing arguments. The evidence spoke for itself. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced her to 20 years in prison. At 82 years old, it was essentially a life sentence. As they led her away, she looked at me one final time, not with rage anymore, but with something worse: satisfaction. I may have failed, she said, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear, but I destroyed your marriage anyway. Marcus will never forgive you for this. And she was right. Marcus and I tried counseling after the trial. We sat in that therapist's office week after week, but he couldn't move past it. I know logically that you did what you had to do, he'd say, but emotionally, I can't separate you from my mother's imprisonment. Every time I look at you, I see her in that courtroom, see her being led away in chains. I know it's not fair, but I can't help how I feel. We divorced 18 months after Celestine's conviction. It was quiet, amicable even. We divided our assets fairly, agreed on how to split time with the children and grandchildren, but my heart broke all over again. I'd survived poisoning only to lose my husband anyway. Celestine had won in her own terrible way. Now, at 73 years old, I live alone in a small apartment across town. Marcus remarried 3 years ago, a nice woman named Patricia whom I've never met. Our children divide their time between us, carefully navigating the ruins of what was once a whole family. Celestine died in prison 2 years ago. Marcus was at her bedside, holding her hand. He called to tell me, his voice heavy with grief even after everything. She was still my mother, he said. And I understood. I'm telling you this story not for sympathy, though that's kind of you to offer. I'm telling you this because poison doesn't always come in a cup. Sometimes it comes wrapped in love, in family obligation, in the face of someone you trust. If you feel sick and doctors can't figure out why, if someone in your life seems a little too interested in your health, a little too insistent that you consume what they give you, trust your instincts. Your life might depend on it. The signs were there all along. I just didn't want to see them. Please, if this story resonated with you, if you learned something that might help you or someone you love, subscribe to this channel. Share the story. Someone out there might need to hear it. Someone might be living their own nightmare and thinking they're crazy for being suspicious. I survived. My body healed, though it took years. My marriage didn't survive, and some days that loss feels worse than the poisoning. But I'm alive. I'm here, and I get to see my grandchildren grow up, watch the sunrise each morning, drink my coffee without fear. These simple pleasures, I've learned, are everything. Trust is a beautiful thing, but trust carefully. Not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well, and sometimes the monster doesn't look like a monster at all. Sometimes she looks like a grandmother with a cup of tea, telling you she only wants to help. My name is Eleanor May Thompson. This is my story, and I'm finally free.